And I'll just echo Mark's comments. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many people in person. It's awesome. But I'm going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, which is compliance. Well, maybe it's just my favorite. All right, here I am. For those who I haven't met, and we can chat later. I look forward to meeting everybody and catching up. But my name is Amanda Johnston, and I'm a managing attorney at the firm. And I have been at the firm for 4.5 years, but primarily most of my career has been in-house at medical device companies. So I worked in legal, regulatory, and compliance at a variety of companies. And at the firm, I split my practice, which is a little unusual, but I do a lot of compliance. So compliance programs, advising on commercial programs, but I also do regulatory strategy submission, interacting with FDA, that kind of stuff, just because I have that kind of a mixed background, which is unique. But today I'm going to be talking about compliance primarily, and we'll hear a little bit more about the FDA regulatory side later this morning. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of intersection between healthcare compliance and medical technology, which a lot of people don't think about when you're thinking about, tech, high-tech stuff. First, I'll give an overview of some of the applicable laws and just other doctrines that apply in the space that may be implicated. And then there's a kind of a variety of special topics that I'm going to dive into that come up or seem to come up more often when it comes to high-tech healthcare. All right. So these are just some examples of what we consider, or what kind of I'm considering today in terms of high-tech healthcare. This is a very small sampling, but there's just been an explosion of technology in the medical healthcare space that either patients use, physicians use, and there's robotic surgeries, there's tons of wearables, there's sensors, there's patient monitoring. Mark talked about the image analysis, which I think has been the diagnostic imaging has been really the majority of kind of AI high-tech healthcare thus far. But now we're seeing, obviously telemedicine has been huge the last couple of years, and that will continue to proliferate, I believe. But yeah, just kind of an idea of just a variety of applications in which kind of this high tech can apply in the medical healthcare space. So it's a very, excuse me, a lot of variety. And if you think about, the state of consumer electronics and consumer tech, we've seen a huge explosion, huge growth in that area over the last 10 years. And I just thought this was interesting. So the global wearable medical device market, so as of this year, it was $40 billion, and it's supposed to reach $156 billion globally. So it just shows that it is going to continue to increase, and we're going to have just kind of more and more exposure to the space, and then as well, it will inform us in terms of where kind of the compliance risks are. You can see that the diagnostic space is the majority, and it looks like it's anticipated to maintain that over the next 10 years or so. But also home therapy and wearable therapy and patient monitoring is going to be a piece of that as well. And I thought this was interesting. So North America outpaces the rest of the world by far on the growth of the wearable medical device market. I think Europe was second. I'll let Cord and Oliver weigh in on that, but I anticipate it will catch on, but the North American region has been really the driver of the majority of the growth in this space. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the laws, which is kind of the boring part, but it's good to have the background, and I can kind of talk a little bit about each of these and how they potentially will be implicated by high-tech healthcare, connected healthcare, AI, that kind of stuff. So anti-kickback statute, so it is one of the main federal healthcare fraud and abuse laws in the United States. And it is a criminal law that really prohibits the exchange of anything of value to induce a reward referral for generation of federal healthcare business. So there are safe harbors. So if you structure an arrangement that provides remuneration in a way that meets the safe harbor, it's protected from prosecution. And really the purpose is to prevent physicians from making medical decisions based on what they're getting of value from the industry or someone else, I guess. Penalties are high. A lot of the settlements you see are both AKS and False Claims Act, so we'll talk about that in a second. But I guess the main point is fines are really large, and you would be excluded from participating in federal healthcare programs in the future. So this is really kind of the main thing that we're looking at as we look at services, benefits, values, provision of those kind of remunerative streams. And the Federal False Claims Act is the other main federal healthcare fraud and abuse law. And the False Claims Act is violated when false claims for reimbursement are submitted to the government. This is broader than just healthcare, but manufacturers, so medical device manufacturers or pharma companies can be liable if they cause a false claim. So if they're sharing false or misleading information related to how the product's coded or reimbursed or how it functions, they could be liable under the False Claims Act as well. And a kickback also, if an arrangement is deemed to be a kickback under the anti-kickback statute, it also will violate the False Claims Act. So a lot of the times you'll see really big settlements in this area because you'll have False Claims Act plus anti-kickback statute liability, and you can see how the claims could really, the number of claims, it's, the fines are per claim, and it depends on the amount of the claim and the amount of remuneration, so it can get really high up there and into the billions. And again, this is a mandatory exclusion under the False Claims Act. All right, Stark. We are not Stark experts because this is primarily not applicable in the medical device industry, pharmaceutical industry, but wanted to pay mention as it relates to DME suppliers and kind of that high-tech healthcare that we've seen shift into the DME space. So Stark, basically, they're looking at the financial arrangements between a physician and an entity that they are referring patients to. So the purpose is to prevent doctors from referring patients to an entity for a service where they actually have a financial relationship with. Fines, exclusion. I think that's, yeah, and there's it only applies to certain designated healthcare services, which is laboratory services, I think DME, there's a bunch listed in the statute. But it does come up in the DME space, so I'll reference it briefly shortly here. And then we also have the CMP law, and there's a portion of the CMP law that relates specifically to beneficiary inducements. So under the CMP law, they are allowed to impose fines, basically, against any person who offers or transfers remuneration, so really anything of value, to a federal healthcare program beneficiary that the person knows or should know is likely to induce them to select a specific provider, practitioner, or supplier. It's a really mouthful of a definition there. But essentially, if a company is giving something to a Medicare beneficiary, whether it's something free, whether it's a free product, free service, the CMP law is implicated. So the assessment must be done as well. All right. And then one that comes up a lot but isn't really codified in federal law is the corporate practice of medicine doctrine. So there's actually 33 states that have laws that restrict the corporate practice of medicine. And there are most states, if you think about it, have exceptions for professional corporations, but essentially the rule is that corporations cannot practice medicine and they can't employ a physician to practice medicine. But if you think about it, if there's exceptions from, maybe there's a private practice clinic, there are exceptions as long as you're meeting those exceptions for those types of professional entities. But essentially, the purpose, or I guess the goals of this doctrine, are to prevent the commercialization of the practice of medicines. There's a lot of pushback in terms of, we don't want it to become a commercial endeavor, although some could argue that it kind of already is. But really, I think the main purpose is, if you think about it, a corporation's main goal is to make money, and physicians, they have duties to their patients and duties to provide healthcare, and those goals don't always align. So this is something that comes up in the context a lot with clinical decision support tools and kind of AI. If you're aiding a healthcare provider in making a determination as to the treatment approach or a diagnosis. So this comes up quite a bit. And obviously this doctrine kind of aligns or intersects with FDA's regulations on how they handle and classify medical devices that do those things, but it's just something else to think about, because it's another potential area of risk for the company. All right, so now we're going to talk just a little bit about some of the specific areas where these laws come up and where they potentially intersect with high-tech healthcare. All right, so the first one, payment reimbursement. So obviously, if you are developing a device that has a new technology or high tech or AI or machine learning, one of the very first things that the development team should think about is how you're going to get paid for it. So are you going to have self-pay options? Are you going to seek insurance coverage? And this is something that can be particularly challenging when it comes to new technologies and innovative products, where our existing coding structure and policies maybe don't even cover it. So just something to think about at a high level. I have a cheat sheet here because there's a bunch of programs that CMS has proposed that I would encourage companies to look into, that basically are intended to help facilitate patient access to these new and innovative technologies by reducing some of the financial burden for adoption. So it's kind of an alphabet soup here, but I'll just name them off. So there's the new technology add-on payments, NTAP, transitional pass-through payments, transitional payments for new and innovative equipment and supplies. And then there was recently a proposed rule for the TSET program, which is transitional coverage of emerging technologies. So these types of programs should really be something that's addressed and considered very early on in the development process, kind of alongside maybe the FDA breakthrough device program as well. So just something to keep on the radar, because it absolutely, payment and reimbursement can be a huge challenge to companies that don't proactively address those concerns once you get to market. So there's insurance billing, there's a potential for rental or loan arrangements. A lot of the products that we've seen lately or seen coming up relate to maybe a capital or small capital equipment with refills, or something that you have to continually buy, but then there's also a capital purchase. So just thinking about how that's going to be, how is that, are you going to, who's going to refill write a prescription for the refill, and what are the medical necessity requirements around that? So there's just a lot of things to think about. And then patient inducement considerations. So are we giving anything to the patient for free? Are there products or anything that we are providing of value that we're not getting payment for? And then just along the same lines of False Claims Act, what I talked about with the liability, is the company sharing correct and accurate reimbursement information? So if there are these, NTAP pass-through payments, is the company appropriately sharing that information such that the provider is able to bill accurately? All right. So switching gears a little bit, but just another way to think of programs is just, is there a product or service that is of value to either the provider or the patient? So kind of follow the money, but also follow where there's not money being collected and there is value being provided. So a lot of the times with these high-tech connected devices, there will be some sort of monitoring or information flow back to the healthcare provider. So just thinking about, does that monitoring provide something of value? Is that taking away something that the doctor was previously doing, such that it could be interpreted as a transfer of value under the AKS? That analysis should be done, just kind of following where the benefits are going. If you're giving something to the patient for free or helping them with services or product offerings, obviously we'd have to do the assessment under the civil monetary penalties law for beneficiary inducement. And then along the lines of what I talked about with corporate practice of medicine, is there a technology using artificial intelligence or machine learning that could potentially, cross the line into practicing medicine? All right, so talk a little bit about DME, although this is a huge topic in and of itself, and we could probably do an entire course or program on this topic. But traditionally we think of DME and we think of wheelchairs, walkers, kind of, not high-tech stuff. But we've recently seen, over the last 10 years or so, a lot of technology is being introduced in the DME space. And that, creates some challenges from a billing compliance perspective. DMEPO's, the quality standards, aren't really written for, they're not intended or drafted for kind of high-tech products. So just, something to think about. We're seeing a lot of manufacturers that are in the DME space. So they are operating both as a DME and a device manufacturer. And that creates challenges in terms of, keeping those roles separate and billing. I mean, obviously then you're billing directly to Medicare, Medicaid. So that implicates the False Claims Act directly, which is a risk area. All right, and then cybersecurity, which we'll hear a little bit more about later as well, but just wanted to point out that in 2021, the DOJ announced its civil cyber fraud initiative. So anytime you have a connected device, which really is, if it connects to the internet and is, processing data, be very proactive about your cybersecurity protocols, because now the DOJ has said that they intend to use the False Claims Act to hold entities and individuals accountable for products or services where there's deficient cybersecurity, whether it's knowingly misrepresenting their cybersecurity protocols or failing to monitor and report issues. So I anticipate that this will be used more as a penalty for cybersecurity. And again, if you remember, it's exclusion is one of the penalties, but also just fines, treble fines. All right, so something else that has come up, telemedicine has exploded over the last, especially since COVID, and there's been a lot of flexibility in the laws and regulations around telemedicine that continues today. But something to think about is we've seen a lot of companies trying to accommodate the patients' and consumers' desire to do everything remotely. So there are a lot of teleprescriber services or telemedicine services where you don't have to leave your house. I mean, I'm guilty. I love using those. I'd rather do those than go into the doctor's office or the urgent care. But we've seen a lot more than companies that contract with these telemedicine providers to provide these services to patients. So it's just a good area to think about, because the DOJ is very interested in telemedicine fraud and other aspects of fraud and abuse. So they have a special fraud alert that I won't go through in detail, but if you are in this space, I encourage you to look at it and keep up to date on the evolving enforcement trends in this area. But essentially, they're looking at patient recruitment strategies. So who is finding the patients? Are they compensating based on the number of patients? Does the telemedicine provider actually have a meaningful contact with the patient enough to determine medical necessity, these kinds of things. So you can see how you'd want to make sure if you're going to engage with a telemedicine provider that they're actually providing legitimate services and having enough contact with the patient and maybe their medical record to actually, order or prescribe a product. All right, then clinical lab testing. So this has kind of always been a hot issue for the DOJ. It's always received a little bit of heightened scrutiny, but just wanted to point it out as well, especially when combined with telemedicine prescribing. So often you'll see a telemedicine prescriber ordering a test so that it's done, really completely out of the doctor's office, which can be done legitimately, but it is an area of increased scrutiny where, unnecessary testing, lack of medical necessity, overcharging, those types of issues that could come up. So key takeaways, and I kind of jumped around a lot just to cover quite a few topics today that just bring up compliance considerations with AI and connected high-tech device. But really implementing a comprehensive compliance program, and you want to address really all of the legal, regulatory, and ethical considerations, but having a cross-functional collaboration really between all the stakeholders is going to be key going into as we move forward into this world where high-tech connected AI ML is going to be kind of just the standard, the norm. And really having that IT collaboration along with medical and legal is going to be critical. Stay informed. So I know a lot of people are kind of like, oh, AI, I don't use it, I don't want to use it, but it's being used. If you're at a company and you don't have a policy on AI and how it can be used, that's something that you should think about, because if you're not using it, somebody at the company is. And even if you have a policy that it's restricted, somebody in your supply chain is probably using it. So it's good to think ahead, stay on top of that, have a stance, and just stay informed on the developments. And then just pay attention to risk areas. So these are changing. It should be part of your really annual risk assessment process. But thinking about coding and billing, obviously where the government hooks are from an enforcement perspective. So billing, the ordering and prescribing practice. If you're developing a device, practicing medicine versus aiding healthcare professionals and making decisions, keeping that line clear because it can be very blurry. And then following the money in terms of, if who are you paying or who's paying, but also where is their value being provided in the product, work stream where there's payment is not being collected. So those are just some high level, and I could probably go into detail on each of these topics for an hour, but just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of kind of the evolving compliance considerations that come up in the high-tech space.